Men rising up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. This is Arise, the Honest Man's podcast. My name is Karun Avatar, and with me is Jai Jagannath, Hari Vilas, and Ujvala Prabhu. Most welcome to everyone who's not with us yet. Yeah, so Jai, self-confidence.
Yeah, the inspiration for this topic, as many of you probably know, that men statistically, it seems, are overrepresented in a lot of areas that seem to be problematic, such as suicide, overrepresentation, homicide, dropping out of school, abuse, all sorts of things. They're overrepresented. And, although there's a lot of talk about male privilege, if you look at these statistics, it doesn't seem that they're that much in a privileged position, honestly speaking. And there are many factors that probably lead to that, obviously. But I thought one interesting factor that might come into that is confidence itself. And maybe specifically self-confidence was how we're titling the show. It appears to me, and initially just an intuitive understanding, that when you lack confidence, it makes it a lot more difficult to respond to life's challenges. So life is itself fundamentally suffering, and you're always going to be met with challenges. And if you don't have proper inner resources like confidence to respond to those challenges, then you're probably likely to make poor choices, more demoralized choices, which leads to a more demoralized life. And so I thought it'd be cool to examine, although there are many factors, let's look at this one factor that may be contributing to this problem of overrepresentation of males in these really problematic categories. That was kind of the inspiration for this particular discussion. Are y'all flowing with that? Does it make sense, or it seems interesting? So I wanted to kind of start off with a definition of confidence. Because, what are we talking about when we're talking about confidence? What do we mean by that? And it seems to play a very important function in both the material and spiritual domain, which is interesting because I guess this will depend on our definition, but it seems to have a function in both domains of spiritual life and also the conventional life. So let's start off with that. What are we talking about when we talk about confidence? I actually looked it up on my Mac dictionary. And just looking at the etymology of the word confidence, it comes from some Latin word, confidentia, anyway, I don't know how to pronounce that, but which means to fully trust, which is interesting. I thought that was like an interesting, from the confidere, have full trust, which is a very interesting etymology here, which I think relates to things we encounter in our own philosophy. So anyway, that's just translated. There are many translations, but the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. So having full trust in someone or something. And I guess in the context of self-confidence, having belief or full trust in one's own self, I guess is what we might be indicating. This is from the English dictionary, but how might you define confidence? Or looking at this topic, how do you think about it? Let's start there.
Ujjwala Prabhu, you're the linguist. You're the linguist amongst us. Let's hear.
I'm the linguist.
Well, you're studying Sanskrit. For those of you who don't know, Ujjwala is studying Sanskrit, and he's kind of a dork with words. So Hari Vilas is properly putting him on the spot.
That's it.
Ow. Well, I kind of see two things here. So you said this Nishchaya kind of point. Of course, I'm going to drop a Sanskrit word to know without even meaning to. So before we came on, you said this thing about Nishchaya, Utsahan Nishchaya Daryat. So when we look at confidence from the perspective of what Nishchaya is, which means kind of like a firm grounding and understanding in the process that one is doing and the ability to move forward with kind of a firm platform, like that's where that type of confidence comes from. And I mean, I would just be a broken record to anybody who knows me to repeat the message of the fact that I think that having a proper conceptual orientation in what you're doing is integral to actually do anything, and what to speak of succeeding at it. So I think that's one level of confidence that we could certainly talk about, and I like to talk about ad nauseum because it's been effective for me, and I've seen it effective. I've seen this one of the only things that's really effective for people in really any sphere of life. We have to be convinced that something is worth having in order to go after it in the beginning. So there's a certain type of confidence or trust that one has in a process or in a life philosophy. And then the other thing, which I think is more what we're getting at here, is kind of like a self-confidence or an ability to like count on oneself, which I think really for men, because that's the context we're talking about this in anyway, is deeply related to how much one is able to live to one's principles. So I think the first one is the foundation of what those principles are. And then the second one is one's ability to confidently, I mean, I guess that's redundant, to accurately and stably move according to those principles in a way that allows one to feel that they're in line with those principles, which then kind of mushrooms into more of that and then allows one to move forward. And for me, this is why I see the great validity and the great boon of having a very, very clear philosophy, having something like Varnashram, having particular roles that one is able to execute, because then that allows for that ability to say, yes, I'm this, and I move along these principles. And because we're followers of the Vedic canon, we're more or less moral objectivists. We believe that there is some universal moral fabric to reality. And when you transgress upon that, which modern society, because it's very opportunity-based, transgresses upon that a lot, then what happens is you get that kind of conflict in your conscience, and then you get a degradation that comes out of that. I really like that excerpt that you brought up about lies, and I think it's just so it's so
we have a
poignant.
little WhatsApp group that he's a part of, and I shared the quote about lies from Jordan Peterson. I can reference it later, just because no one knows what you're talking about. So I'm just mentioning it.
Yeah. So I'll just say one last thing, because I mean we'll unpack this more. Yeah, I think it's something that's hit me a lot recently, is I need to live according to my principles in order to get a good sleep at night, so that I can then get up and do things that I need to do and want to do. And if I transgress my own principles, or if I don't have them established from the beginning, how can you have self-confidence as a man? How can you move forward in your life? Therefore, a culture based in responsibility, I think, is the foundation for any real self-confidence. And I think it's kind of pointless, kind of this jargon. It's like a band-aid of just like, okay, just redefine it and just believe in yourself. Because that's what we see in self-confidence, like motivational speakers, this kind of a thing. Like, let's not deal with the basis of it. Let's not deal with the principles or how you can follow your principles, but let's just kind of rebrand what you're going through now and then empathize with yourself so as to remove the guilt. But we should be looking at the guilt. We should be looking at the fact that I'm feeling guilty because I'm transgressing something integral to me. Again, we're moral objectivists, so there's, we're not postmodernists, I hope. Anyway, I'll stop there. Sorry.
Nice.
Go. Yeah. I just want to relate to that briefly and say that the first thing that came up for me in this question was that self-confidence is ultimately preceded by self-acceptance. And Ujjval, I really appreciate your point that it's based on living up to our innermost, deepest values. Because how can we accept ourselves if we're not able to do that? So I really like that as a fundamental sort of like grounding thing for self-acceptance in being able to uphold those values. And then just to relate also to how Jai defined it initially in terms of trust, or just that edge coming into it, is just bringing in the Krishna factor. I was discussing this definition with a dear friend of mine, Gopi Jivana, and he was relating it to essentially the amount of faith that you have in God to empower you with His mercy. Because it's kind of like, if we rely solely on our own willpower and determination and sense of integrity to uphold our values, especially in the context of of living within times in which, you know, the entire world around us is diametrically opposed to these values. We're going to need some help. We're certainly going to need some empowerment. So just that, you know, that confidence is also very closely interlinked with our faith in the empowerment of Krishna.
Nice. Harvey, last. I'm going to reflect what I just heard from you guys real quick.
Can I just add once? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Add, because you want to respond to this, or you can add.
Yeah, just one thing, because I really like that, Karuna. And in the first part, I'd say that the big problem with self-confidence now, or how we speak of it, is that, as you said, we have to live to our deepest kind of desires and aspirations, but we use that language and then we ignore the fact that I don't get to invent that. Whereas like in modern culture, like we have this idea that I get to invent my aspirations and my desires, and like I get to invent that compass and then live by my decision of what that compass is. And I think that just creates havoc. And that's why we have so many unconfident people, you know, so many people that are just not able, because they're like trying to force a square into a round peg. Like they're already, again, we're a particular way fundamentally. Material nature is a particular way fundamentally. And we've been sold this kind of fairy tale that like, no, just rethink it and then work on that paradigm. And that's just so insane, because how can everybody think up something that's going to be accurate? You know, you have 7 billion people on the planet. So anyway, yeah.
Nice. All right, Harvey, last thoughts on the same topic, then I'm going to reflect what I'm hearing from all of y'all.
But the question is still defining confidence.
Yeah, we're still defining confidence here.
Well, I think that if we were to give it just like a broad basic definition, we see that to accomplish anything in the world, you need some sense of determination to be able to, unless you're doing something extremely simple, but for any kind of task that requires some magnitude, there's some determination required. And we see for that determination, you have to fight for it. It's not automatic. If we see, it's not too easy to get anything done. So confidence, basically, people have to draw on something to have the strength to make that commitment to say, okay, I'm going to commit to fighting for whatever it is, whether it's whatever, doesn't matter what the desire is. So where you draw your strength from, that's how I would see. It's like that is how I generally think about confidence. Like people draw strength from something in order to stand up towards, you know, fighting the inevitable, fight that one has to fight just to exist in this world and just to fulfill one's responsibilities. And people can then draw this confidence. There's many varieties of strategies, basically 3 big strategies: motive, ignorance, goodness, and passion, that you can draw confidence from something, so that you can basically stand up and say, okay, I can commit to this, I'll fight for this. And like you were saying, the absence of that is vast, both within our devotional community and the world at large, as people are not able to, they don't actually have, they're not able to basically stand up and make and keep commitments, which means that they're not able to draw properly on whatever is supposed to give them confidence.
I really like that.
No, all everything you've all just said is very nice. Just reflecting, Nisha means like a firm grounding, and firm grounding means understanding of what reality is fundamentally. Like, this is reality, and this is the sadhya, this is the goal, and this is the sadhana, this is the process for achieving that goal. And then according to the firm understanding of that reality and firm grounding in reality, then you can, as a sadhaka, doing the sadhana, trying to achieve the sadhya, you can experience confidence. Without that firm grounding and acceptance of reality, confidence can't be experienced. That's what I heard from Udro. And Karuna Avatar focuses on, kind of brought up the point of needing empowerment from above. And so having confidence that that reality, it has potency. It's not omnipotent, but it has potency to extend to those who are trying to achieve it. And so that confidence is also required. Obviously, if we're depending only on ourselves as finite, infallible, and limited entities with all sorts of impositions on us, we're likely to fail. So, and then wherever we're drawing that strength from was what I heard from Harvey Vilas, basically. So I guess the follow-up question is, I think you guys have already mentioned this, but why is this critical in the spiritual and material domain? Because it's a spiritual thing also, it seems. Like, at least the word Nisha is used in the context of Upadeshamrita to talk about that which is favorable for achieving the sadhya. You know, that which is unfavorable should be rejected, that which is favorable should be accepted. So it's critical in the spiritual domain. And I'm also particularly interested of its critical function in the material domain. Like, why are so many people not confident? What is leading? I think your initial definitions are indicating that. I'm just trying to flesh that out more. Like, why are people so lacking so much confidence based on the direction that you defined it? Let's flesh that out more. The reason I'm asking you guys, because at least Ujjwala I know and Harvey Vilas, no, you guys are like very confident individuals. At least you come off that way. And I know I come off as confident. People have told me that they think I'm arrogant because I walk in the room. You know, I'm very regal when I walk. I was a dancer. I can't help it. So we're confident people. So what contributes to that confidence? But specifically what I'm asking now is, why is this critical in order to function or thrive, both in the spiritual domain and in the material domain?
Well, as I said, my initial answer also, I believe that, like if you read in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna in the 18th chapter, there's a few like core terms or core aspects of the human experience or the elements in this world that he defines according to the three modes, and then one of them is driti, or determination, which is the ability to have to exert sustained effort. And I think most practically that is where, both in the material and the spiritual sense, that's where confidence plays its most salient role. Because it's interesting to see that it's not just spiritual people that are confident. It's like there's some people I know are very confident. Like Elon Musk is confident that he's going to go to Mars. I mean, the guy is insane. You can see the guy is crazy, to a certain extent. He's a genius, but he's very confident also in what he's doing. So confidence is interesting, that it's obviously not a phenomenon that's only for spiritual people. It's like something that you can draw from a variety of reasons. But that's the one thing, like someone who is really confident, that's the one thing, at least they are able to they can have sustained effort for their conviction. That's that thing. And that's where you actually draw confidence. So confidence is drawn from. So whether if you want to achieve anything in the world, you have to have confidence. And also we can most saliently see what happens if you don't have confidence.
Right.
And you see,
you don't do anything.
You don't do anything, exactly. You just cry. That's the fact.
All right. Anyone wants to elaborate on that? You want to elaborate on that, brother? Yeah.
Well, I really like it because it goes back to something that I find myself saying a lot, and also convincing myself of. And you reflected this nicely, Jai, because largely I heard it from you first, probably, is that we have to have our goal set out before we can have effort towards anything. We have to have a foundation for everything that we're doing. Otherwise, you can't do it. Because when we talk about having confidence in something, it's just that you have confidence in something, that you can attain something, that you can get to something, that something is worth having. And so, yeah, maybe I'm being redundant, but it goes right along with what you're saying, Harvey Loss, that we really, that has to be set out, and we can see that in the material realm also. People are doing that. People are convinced that they can get something, and therefore, because it feels like a reality for them, they're chasing after it. I often use because this was a big realization for me in my life when I decided to really start chasing after things as a devotee, after I fell into kind of like a 4-hour a day, slump where it's like I'm just getting through my day. And I realized I didn't really have parameters set up for what I was going to attain. And I thought about somebody who starts a restaurant. If somebody starts a restaurant, they know what they want. They know what the goal is. Otherwise, there's no way they're going to do it. Because starting a restaurant means you're going to work for 16 hours a day for the first 2 years to break even, not even to make money, just to break even. And we see this all over. And why? Because people know what they want and they go after it. So that's required. The problem in the world now is that it's all superfluous. And at best, what happens is it gets reflected back at us well, it's about what you want. And we go to this kind of postmodern, you make your own definition, which is actually anathema to the way, or anathema, I think is how you say that, to the way we are as beings. We need parameters. We need actual, we really just need a viewpoint that allows us to see the structure of the world and then work in harmony with it. Because there is a structure to the world. It's not all relative. And so I think in order to access that dritti, as you said, Prabhu, then we need to have a foundation for that to actually work. Otherwise, good luck. You may get it for a little bit and then you get crushed, and then it only takes so many times being crushed, and then I'll just watch Netflix, I guess, because that is what really matters, you know? Well, anyway, I get some dopamine hits.
Well, it's interesting because if you think that, in one sense, we see that in the 18th chapter, when Krishna defines Driti, and he says, it's very interesting because he says, those in the mode of goodness, their Driti, their determination is unshakable. But then when he defines those in the mode of passion, generally we see passionate people, quote unquote, they seem extremely determined. Like you see, it's in ignorance where you just do nothing. In ignorance, you just basically, you shirk the responsibilities that life throws upon you, and you just put your head into the computer or whatever it is. So that's but then in passion, the more pure passion becomes, you have this ambition and this drive. And one's confidence is vested in that hope of fulfilling desire. He has faith that the fulfillment of this desire is worth the pain, and then they work hard. But it's interesting how let's see, I have my little Bhagavad Gita in front of me. Why speculate? Let's see here.
We love speculation.
That's it. Okay, let's see here. The worker in passion is very interesting. He is basically Harsha Shokandita. He is extremely moved by happiness and sorrow. So basically that his confidence will fluctuate according to the material conditions. So when I look at devotees, what's very fascinating is we look at, because practically, let's just be honest, when you speak, people might look confident, but when you actually sit with them and they trust you a little bit, and you see what comes out. And then they start crying or whatever it is. So they start getting depressed. But we don't show that to people because you don't want to look like an idiot. But in most cases, when you speak to people, you see that's happening. What I find fascinating, what I've seen over the years, is that it's not that people, even devotees in general, they wouldn't be permanently in a state of lack of confidence and depression, but they actually oscillate between states of extreme self-importance. And then states of severe self-loathing. That's what I practically see. I see these people. They sometimes feel just like, you can see it. It's completely puffed up, and they think they're really into it. Whether it's even in spiritual life, same thing. You can become very sort of passionately consumed by passion, and they seem very confident. But then you're like, well, wait for it. wait for it. And then
it goes up, must come down.
And then it's just like, oh, I'm so pathetic. No one loves me. It's very interesting. So that's passion, moved by joy and sorrow. And the reason for that is because, and I think it's interesting to see that we have to understand that, as I said, confidence is not limited to spiritual people. You have to have confidence, otherwise you become a snail in your next life. So you have to be a human, you have to have some confidence. But then the distinction then between the spiritualist and the materialist is actually where they draw that confidence from. Like Ujjvala making the point that the spiritualist draws that confidence from, to a certain extent, his understanding, which is very important for the sadhaka. And we know that the pure devotee, he draws his confidence from a whole other platform. But it's fascinating to see. And that's when I look practically at our devotional sphere, specifically men. It is this... you see, people have to make that shift. They have to make that shift and understanding that drawing confidence from passion, from a passionate mentality, which means whatever we can think about what that practically means. How it looks to draw confidence from passion versus drawing confidence from goodness. That cycle, people have to get out of that cycle because it's not, and that they, to a certain extent, they're addicted, and that's the only confidence they know is the confidence that comes from passion. And one has to somehow make that shift to a more sustainable level of confidence, which is sustained by something not ultimately, not sustained by something that is influenced by something in the world. So that because it's fascinating. If you speak to the most beautiful people in the world, like if you speak to models who are like super beautiful, then you will even they sometimes feel ugly.
Yes.
It's a fascinating nature. So everyone's
Most
self-concept,
times even.
regardless of your objective position in the world, like where you're situated in terms of any opulence, you know that image of yourself will always fluctuate, and devotees are not exempt from that.
Well, this brings me to a question about because particularly in spiritual circles, but even in the material world, you have some high ideal. And the reason it's an ideal is because it's abstract and in a sense it's perfect. So the ideal image of beauty, the ideal wealthy person, and then the ideal spiritual life. And so the nature of ideal is that it is abstract, it's hard, it's very difficult to achieve. And it seems, and bringing it into the spiritual community, it seems because the ideal is so high, like in our philosophy, the ideal of Krishna Prema, more exalted than Brahmananda, more exalted than the experience of Paramatma even, and so on. It's such a high ideal that I guess my experience with high ideals is that it can crush confidence. Like on the one hand, because it's reality, it gives you something very clear to aim for, which is itself invigorating on the one hand. But on the other hand, because of the height of the ideal, so to speak, and the sense of almost unattainability, it can also be a great burden. And so how do you enter into drawing from reality, like defining confidence as drawing from where we're drawing our energy from, to our determination from. So you're drawing from reality this high ideal, but the ideal is so high and you're probably falling short on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. If you take inventory of your spiritual life, you're just like, ugh, and it can be very demoralizing. In other words, it leads to demoralization. So how are you supposed to draw your confidence from a high reality and not be demoralized when you inevitably fail to meet that ideal, or even in some times it feels you're not even moving towards the ideal? Like I'm chanting Hare Krishna for years and years and years, and where is my taste? I was told in Upadesharamrita that the jhanas will go away gradually. I'm like, it looks like it's stronger than ever. And
it's getting worse, bro.
It's getting worse.
Need a liver transplant.
So how am I supposed to be confident in the face of such a high ideal? Like what is this sattvic confidence, so to speak, or Shuddha sattvic confidence when the ideal is so high, I'm falling so short? How is it possible not to be moved by the Shoka Harsha experience that you described from the Gita and so on? I think the question is clear, right? I'm sure you have this experience.
Question is clear.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I'm gonna take these beads and just.
Depressingly clear. Well, I think the problem is that devotees, they're wonderful, but the problem is that
they're wonderful, but
most people, our philosophy, our values are not actually abstract at all. It's not abstract at all. Like the goal of pure devotion is not at all abstract. Because the thing is that even the philosophy itself, it actually links it with very tangible realities. So firstly, it is true, like we see that a goal is actually a thing that gives great confidence. Once one can take that step to commit to a goal, then that goal actually surcharges one with great focus and energy. But the problem is if you say, okay, my goal is pure devotional service, I'm a spirit soul, my goal is to get the hell out of this world, go back to Godhead, then if you keep it at that, it means that you don't properly understand what it means. So we see the scripture itself pulls that goal. Like, for example, we say the goal is to make Krishna happy. Okay, but then that's very abstract. But then we say, yes, but you make Krishna happy by representatively understanding that Krishna's desire is situated in the spiritual master. And then immediately, boom, how abstract is that? Very clear, Baba. It's not abstract. It's not like something you only know. It's like immediately right now. And the problem is that people, specifically in the initial phases of spiritual life, people actually shirk the tangible, clear aspects of what it means to strive for pure devotional service. They do not actually adopt those very clear, tangible goals, and then they think it stays abstract or theoretical, but it isn't. It's very simple, and it is. And when our goals have to become very immediate, because only immediate goals can actually serve to urge us into action. So, and that is a mistake, not a mistake, but it's just it has to be the job of spiritual education, or the role of spiritual education is to instruct people to understand how this desire of Krishna, how tangible it actually, how clear it actually is, and but if we are going to shirk it when it comes, like when it does come, when the clear aspect of Krishna's desire comes knocking at your door, and you say, no, I don't want to do this, then you will be thrown back onto some kind of high theoretical understanding, because you missed the opportunity to make it very plain and simple.
Okay, let me ask a follow-up on that. Just I'm going to hear your thoughts on this too, Udrilla, but okay, the tangible aspects of the ideal. For example, Atyahara Prayashtra Prajalpaniya, very clear, tangible directions of things you need to do if you're actually interested in the sadhya. So Prajalpa, let's just take that one. Don't
Yes.
hear or talk nonsense.
Sure.
I better leave.
It's very tangible, and if I want to go, I shouldn't shun this very tangible aspect of application. But how you're supposed to apply that comprehensively, like especially when you think of like the digital media world, which I suspect a lot of devotees also we indulge in, and you're hearing from this thing and that thing and that thing and this thing, that's also Prajalpa, and you're not following that. So how I'm supposed to be confident that this is even possible to follow if when you have a tangible direction like no Prajalpa, which itself seems you have to be on a high level to apply it in the first place. You get kind of caught in this circle. I don't know if that is coming out clearly.
Sure.
So what's the response to that? Okay, so you don't want the idea to be too high. You got to go for immediate application point. Here's an immediate application point. Don't do Prajalpa. But in order to not do Prajalpa, it appears that you got to be on a high level to really do that.
No, not at all. It's like,
Okay.
you know, it's a principle, and there's a gradual application of that principle. Mm-hmm. So for example, we see, okay, no Prajalpa. So first thing. So then you look, okay, where am I at? Yeah, that's the goal. Where am I at? Okay, am I watching porn? Okay, let's start there. You know, ultimate. Okay, boom. And okay, I'm not, but I do this, do I do this? So then you have this gradual succession. So what's important for devotees in general is that goals is like there's the ultimate goal, and then you will always have to understand that 20% of your time you can be looking at the ultimate goal, but 80% of your energy should be going on your next step. What is your next step? And if you would always focus on your next step, and you see that someone like, I think Vaisheshika Prabhu, he really embodies, he's really into goals, and his goals are always really very practical. It's about what's your next step, and the principle is always better service. So this understanding that to improve yourself, it's not just it's always there's something, one new thing that you can do to move forward, to one new principle one can be taken, and really the thing is that I see either devotees who have goals, or I see devotees who have no goals, and there's no such thing. There's no such thing as devotees who have too little goals or too insignificant goals. No, it's not. It's like if you have goals, then you're good. Then you're moving forward, and this doesn't really matter how big those goals are. Like in the beginning, if it's just okay, chanting this, or do a little bit, or I do a little bit here, or let me just at least until breakfast, no Facebook or social media. So these things can always be very practical, and each person has to focus on his next step, and you have to be humble enough. This is the actual challenge. You have to be humble enough to understand what is your next step. Like that's the thing. That's a problem. People are not willing to look at themselves and say, "Listen, actually, where am I? This is where I am. This is the goal. I'm beneath the screen, very low. So my next step is actually very simple. But the moment, and I know one devotee who I lived with for a long time in South Africa, a wonderful guy, and he came to Krishna consciousness. One could say, with a with a what do you call it, like a handicap. You know, you had a child when he was 16, so it's like, you know, boom, that's like a killer. So much money, it means you can forget about joining the ashram or all that kind of stuff. It's just like, you know, you immediately have this heavy weight that hangs on you, this tether. So, but what I found was interesting about him is, even though he always struggled with Krishna consciousness, he was never he was sort of he was always sort of understanding just this is where he is. Like he is just not someone that can embody this ideal. I'm not gonna take saffron and do this. He's like, no, that's just I forget about that. If I can just sort of keep everything together and chant a few rounds here and read a little bit there and cook here, then that's what I can do. And I find it very interesting how his confidence is in one sense more sustainable and more actually sattvic than and comparative to some people who look to embody the ideal way more. But that it's just because it's not as simple. It's like we all know the externals. Just because you might be able to embody the externals more, has nothing to do with what's actually happening in the heart. So that principle of being honest enough to understand what's your position, then you can assess your next step, and then the goals become extremely tangible and attainable also if you're looking at your next step.
Good response.
I recently heard this really, really helpful metaphor in this regard, or this analogy from Yamuna Bihari, where he says that, it's like using a GPS. What is the first step? Like, you have to know what your current location is, and then you're going to put the end location. Now, I happen to be in the Western Cape of South Africa, which is at the very southern tip of the African continent. And now say I want to get to Cairo, way up there, and I put that into my GPS, it's going to generate like 1,000 steps in the journey. And so it's ridiculous to get bewildered about the amount of steps in the journey, because what to do? The goal, the destination is where it is. So we simply focus on what is the next step in the journey, and it becomes very, very simple. But I think that the greatest challenge, just to affirm what Haridullah said, is just that like most of us are just completely unwilling to humbly accept and acknowledge where we are at right now. And then it becomes immensely frustrating.
Yeah, I had a joke on this that I was thinking to share it on my Facebook page, but 4 is the new 16, meaning 4 rounds. And like the whole sense of that phrase, maybe I will share, but the whole sense of the phrase is that as Kali Yuga progresses and the imposition of matter becomes stronger and stronger, it may become harder and harder for people to do anything devotional. So even a little bit can count for a lot if you're at that stage. That's how I'm using it here in this application. And having the humility to admit that, like, okay, when I was a gung-ho devotee, first of all, I'm not advocating chanting less rounds if you're already initiated and all that. I'm just putting it out here like this. But when I was really enthusiastic, it was like 16 rounds. Now all these new impositions have come in my life, and 4 is the new 16 for me. Like having the humility to think I need to backtrack and start to really ground myself firmly, and again reestablish. Not that you should do it that particular way. Get guidance from the guru and all that if you're initiated, but I'm just throwing it out there. The humility to admit I'm here and this is my next step to reach this other thing, which is actually a step to another thing, which is actually a step to another thing, and having the humility to admit that. That's what I'm hearing from y'all right now.
Well,
yeah.
On this one, has to be careful also about the dynamic of. So basically, when we fall short of our ideals and our values, we feel guilt.
Right.
We feel crap, and that's good. It's actually good for us. There's a purpose why we're made for that. That guilt is not like your your appendix or your tonsils. It's not like some evolutionary mistake and you can actually just cut it out. Oh, you don't really need your tonsils. It's useless. And then they just snip it out, not understanding that it has a function. So similarly, they're like, oh, guilt. Oh, that's just somehow something that we have left from the 19th century. Yeah. But it's okay. You can just snip, just cut it out because it's really inconvenient and it causes big problems in life. So we know that now everything has its purpose. So guilt going beneath standards has a problem. The problem is when you just know how to digest it. What should one do about that guilt? And that guilt is simply supposed to spur us on into action. So there's like the highest level of integrity is only available to the pure devotee, to that person who has actually successfully abandoned all other desires and is only focused on Krishna's desire. He has real integrity. Like he has no difference between inside and outside. For all the rest of us, our integrity is constantly under attack. And we will not have that. We cannot have that same kind of integrity as the pure devotee. But we have what is attainable for us is like a kind of integrity in motion. Like, and Krishna explains this, apichet sudharacharo bhajate mamananyabhak, that even if one performs a horrible activity, if one is rightly situated in his determination, then he is still considered a sadhu, which means one is able to have integrity if one is rightly situated in the determination. And Prabhupada defines the determination as accepting the reality of what the spiritual standard is. So just understanding that like now there's two ways to do it. If you can't chant 16 rounds, for example, this is a very clear principle, then there's two ways you can go about it. One is you can try to somehow explain to yourself how that actually Prabhupada, it was not so serious about people chanting 16 rounds, and it is okay, whatever. Or the other ways you can say, well, actually, the reality is that if I really want Prabhupada's full mercy, it's very clear. He made it very clear that at least I have to come to this standard. I'm not able to do it now, but let me work towards that standard. So it's like a massive difference in how you orientate yourself towards standards. And this is very important in the discussion of confidence, because for people in general, the moment you're beneath a standard, then you will feel guilt, and that guilt will either erode your confidence, or if you have the proper response, that guilt can be something that spurs you on into action to try to work on that confidence. That's what I've seen also with devotees over the years, guiding people. Then you see that people oscillate between stages of intense spiritual enthusiasm or not. And it really is doesn't depend on whether they're following the standard. It's whether they are actually striving. Like when devotees are somehow engaged again and they're working, then they exude confidence and exude quite some spiritual enthusiasm, even if they might not be living up to the high standards. Versus then you see sometimes these people that might even be pious by nature, and they're not following the regular, but they're following the regular principles, even chanting 16 rounds. But there's no striving. They're not actually taking any kind of goal to move somewhere, and then they can also become depressed and lax in their practice. So very interesting. Krishna himself defines the sadhu more as the orientation, the intention of where one is moving. That is the real qualification, and it's not about whether you're above some standard or not. But that standard should be one should properly orientate himself towards these spiritual standards and not make them relative. Because as Ujjvala says, we're not postmodernists.
Yeah, I wanted to double back to the original question here also, and hear Ujjwala's thoughts on this also. How do you reconcile yourself to a high ideal when you're falling short? Our present conversations also connected to that point. But here's the ideal, and I'm falling short, and so I feel demoralized by that falling short, or guilt, using that word guilt. So how does one deal with that? When you're not able to live up to the principles that you want, then you kind of seem to lose confidence, and it makes it hard to be enthusiastic.
There's another nice comment here. Guilt can lead us to humility in supporting our spiritual life, or guilt can lead us to want to humiliate ourselves away from Krishna.
Nice.
Well, one has to also adopt spiritual standards under the guidance of senior instruction. So that's another important thing. One should not arbitrarily set determinations. It's like, I remember in like beginning days of the ashram, I used to do that a lot. I made these spontaneous vows, like these sort of independent vows. Like, okay, like you just ate like whatever 4 gallons of halva, and okay, now this sugar, I'm done. I'm not gonna eat sugar again in this life. No more sugar. Never again. Never again. But if you make these kind of vows, it's very bad for you. It's like very unhealthy to make promises you can't keep. So the first step is to stop making promises you can't keep. Stop that. That's the actual first thing to stop you, is to stop saying that you're going to do things if you know you can't do that. Make promises that you can't keep. Make promises that you can keep. That's the first step. We see it's interesting in the Mahabharata when Arjuna made that vow that either he will die, he will kill himself, or he will kill Jayadratha the next day after Jayadratha had killed his son. Then Krishna was like, what? Why? How can you do that? How could you make a vow like that without consulting me? It's very interesting that even our vows you have to consult before you make promises or make vows, because these things are very real. And that's an interesting thing that you see with people who can't follow vows, is that there are oftentimes people who make them quite easily, and that is something that has to be stopped.
Yeah, I like that point a lot, and it loops back around to something you said earlier when you brought up Vaisheshika Prabhu, and you said it doesn't matter how big your vows are, and then I would just addend that and say, it matters more that they're quite small so that they're attainable. It matters a lot how big they are, because often we make them way too big, and then they're impossible to follow. And then that, again, that's kind of what I was saying in the beginning too, is you erode your ability to have confidence in yourself, because you're just in this habit of knowing you can't follow through on the things that you're trying to say. And you're desperately wanting to be able to do it because you feel like, intrinsically, you're like, I know I need this. I know I need to move forward, but you keep doing things that are extreme because it's this passionate outlook on life. And then one thought I was having in what you're saying, Hari Vilas, is so when we take the three modes and we take the way the false ego works, passion is looking forward at that kind of two-dimensional ideal that I've made for myself, and that person that I really want to pretend to be, like kind of like the core of the false ego, like I become a brahmachari, or I'm this type of a successful person, or I'm that. And then, the illusion that I can actually live up to that really lofty goal. And passion is, the mode of passion is expressed when I feel like I can actually get there. Then the mode of ignorance is expressed when I'm cripplingly faced with the fact that it was never really sustainable in the beginning. And then the mode of goodness really means to be situated in the middle and to understand I am who I am. And actually, I should take stock of how far I've come. And I should take stock of what I can do right now, practically today, this minute, these little tiny goals that I can actually do in order to move forward. That's kind of my reflection of what you were saying earlier. I really appreciate that point. And it was pretty integral to me when I had that click and realized that my life wasn't about a 40-year down the road attainment. My life is very much about what I do today. It's very much about what I do this week. Really, at most, like what I'm going to do for the next 6 months. That's like as far as I can really look. I can have some ideas about the other things, and I can have an overall plan, but that plan long-term always needs to be subject to change and always needs to be a lot more fluid. And the things in the short term need to be what I tack down nicely. Whereas often we do it the opposite way. Our day-to-day is fluid. I don't even know what I'm going to do after I wake up. And then I try to have like a clear plan about who I'm going to be in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And then we just kind of set ourselves up for this failure and kind of oscillating.
It seems to me one of the big issues, just on an experiential level, of the self-confidence idea is not really knowing who the self is, empirically speaking, not even spiritual. And I feel this is one problem, well, not problem as such, but when you come to a spiritual institution like ours, you have a clarity about the ontological self. You hear from the Gita, it's super duper clear. But when it comes to the empirical self that you're actually dealing with on a visceral level day to day, there's a lot less clarity around that empirical self, which makes it really hard to develop confidence. Particularly, I'm thinking in a very practical way, the sort of skill that you're going to develop and that you're going to use to function in the world, and also derive not only value for yourself, but offering value back to others. But when you don't have a clarity about who you are on an empirical level, you can't really do that. Or it doesn't really manifest, and that adversely affects the experience of feeling confident. So I feel, I do feel that this is an issue that does come up a lot in our spiritual communities, is the empirical self, how to discover that. I guess that's related. If you're saying self-confident, well, who is the self you're confident in? The ontological self is super clear. The empirical self is like a question mark. How am I supposed to develop self-confidence if I have a question mark on the empirical self? Comments on this or experience with this?
Yeah. Absolutely. For sure. Well, I've just been very interested to get to the point where we sort of like dig into this reality, and just it also just reminds me of Richard Rohr's amazing book Falling Upwards, and the essential importance of these two halves of life, or these two essential goals of life, essentially establishing the external, as Jai says, the empirical self, and that kind of like container within which the true inner world and ultimately communion with Krishna and our ultimate spiritual goals can exist. Because the container is required, otherwise there will just be spillage. So it's
No pun intended.
Anyway, so yeah, and I can also say quite a bit on my current sort of like experiential reality. But let's hear from Ujjwal first. Where were you at, Prabhu?
Well, I think in regards to that, sorry, I just lost it. Can you? So the empirical self.
Yeah,
And
the first
like not having clarity on the empirical self. Well, for me, this kind of comes back to what we talked about in the last podcast that you had me on, and the fact that I think there's a really disjointed focus on the empirical self in modern culture, and a really disjointed focus on finding my identity and who I'm supposed to be and putting all of my chips there, and not focusing on the fact that that is largely inherited from being a part of a community, being around a group of people that I'm responsible to. My responsibilities to the people that I'm around and to the people that I dedicate myself to is largely, when we're talking about an empirical level, because we're not talking about the ontological self, it's largely where all those things are set in stone. And so again, I think a lot of people are chasing their tails. I can largely say I was chasing my tail for a long time, thinking, why is it that I'm not able to figure out exactly what I'm meant for, who I'm meant to be, and although I'm a big supporter of the fact that I don't think a lot of people have clear they don't have ontological clarity. So I'm not so quick to say that we all have that worked out and it's very simple, because I do see a lot coming forward if you actually get ontological clarity versus think that the couple sentences you inherited when you first picked up spiritual life is actual ontological clarity. Yeah. So I think that there's something to be said about ontological clarity, but the empirical clarity and that visceral feeling of not knowing who I am largely stems from a fact that we're told we need to figure it out by ourselves in a vacuum, alone, looking at ourselves and our own nature. Those are variables, and they're largely secondary ones in relation to who I'm around and with. They take a part. But if I don't have a community, and if I don't have responsibility is really the thing. As a man, if I don't have responsibility and accountability and all of the good things that come from that, and that kind of bolster myself as being able to have confidence in myself because I'm able to provide those things or, be dependable, then I'm just going to run around in this circle of trying to figure out what's going to fulfill me. So I really think that's, it's just this hyperinflated idea of my empirical self, and I'm only focusing on that and I can't figure it out. And it's like, well, if you go around a group of people and you care about them, quickly you're going to be like, well, how can I contribute? It's a question. What role can I play? And then my values, or not values, but my abilities are going to be a part of that process of figuring out what that is. But if you're not a part of the equation and you're not a part of an actual holistic situation, I don't really like that word because it's just a buzzword. But if you're not a part of an ecosystem, so to speak, then how are you going to get that clarity? You're just going to keep, bouncing around. Well, I think I'm good at this, and I need a group of people that will appreciate me for this or that, and then we'll change. And one last thing, I think the strongest proof for this is, I think if any one of us looks back into our lives, take it on a 5-year basis. I'm 28, so maybe this is going to level out. It seems like it's leveling out. But if I look back every 3 years, every 5 years, I'm a different person.
Absolutely.
And it's largely dictated by the people that I'm around. It's largely dictated by the situations that I'm in. Is that a problem? Or is that pointing to the fact that that's just the way people are as social animals? Why is Sadhu Sangha so important for devotional Sangha? We inherit our attributes from the people that we're around, all the way up to the perfection of sadhana. We're supposed to inherit our ultimate attributes, which are going to be eternal, characteristics. They're going to come in, and that's because of the sadhus that we associate with.
Nice.
Ujjwal, my initial reaction to what you were saying now was kind of thinking that, sure, we need to contribute to a community, but it's kind of like, you need to know what is truly the value that you bring as an individual in the context of that community. But then as you continued speaking, it became clear to me that actually the community, the experience of coexisting in a space with other like-minded souls that you love and care for, that facilitates, or let's say catalyzes, your own effective meditation on your own value and what you're able to bring. And it gives you clarity around how to develop that. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I would also say that it takes it out of the forefront, and it puts it more in its rightful place as an auxiliary part, or maybe not auxiliary, but as a part that isn't the main focus. And then it's manageable, because the main focus is, I'm a part of this community, and we're supposed to intrinsically learn these things by the time we're 10. But society is so disjointed that now we're 30, 25, 35, and still trying to figure out, like, what is my place? So that's what we have to deal with. And that's really, I think that this is largely, and this is my 2 cents, so take it with a grain of salt, I think this is largely the basis that Srila Prabhupada saw the necessity for Varnashram for, because he saw that, okay, these people don't have the building blocks to even be able to think about high spiritual topics, because they're too absorbed in themselves. What am I, he's giving this philosophy, he's giving all of these wonderful things, and he's just like sannyasis nowadays, just getting flooded with letters. My marriage, I can't find, nobody values me, nobody cares about me, nobody, I'm not able to figure out a place that I click. It doesn't work. We need some sort of a context. We need people to move forward. Now, I think it has to be done on a small level. So the next trip is that you try to institutionalize it, and then it has to be done in little sanghas, and then it grows out from there.
Comments, Hari Vilas, on this empirical self, ontological self.
Well, I think that a large part of the difficulty in finding your empirical self is because people have too high expectations of actually what the empirical self is that they can reasonably expect to attain.
Yeah, certainly.
I think it happens. Yeah, it's like, like when I was coming here, my spiritual master asked me, like for a long time I lived outside of the ISKCON temple. I lived in a little house with my friends, me and Karuna Avatar. We were having a joel, just like, eating our nice sattvic diet and chilling in the mountain, and then preaching on the side a little bit here and there. And it was great, and I was thinking, well, this is the life. And then
it was great.
And then my spiritual master asked me, okay, come to New York City. It's like first New York City, then ISKCON. Go living in an ISKCON temple. Poof, that's
Gurudev,
that's not fun. So then you're living and then it's like, no, what are you doing? So then it's like you come here, and then you're like, oh, here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity to be part of a community. Everything that I need spiritually is here. It's the deities. There's a community. There's a very clear role. There's a very clear service. A very clear goal in life. I'm like, God, I don't want to do this with my life. I don't want to run a temple, think about bhoga, cleaning supplies, construction, have people, criticize you the whole time, have having to deal with bums, like, homeless people that come in, and then you have to tell them they can't, it's a schlep. So then, but that's the opportunity that was available, and it actually took me quite a little bit of time. I was like, geez, am I really going to do this? Like, I thought I was going to do more. I thought I was going to become a YouTuber, or I was going to become something. But then I realized, this is actually just what I can do. And it was like, it was a little bitter, but at the same time, now it's wonderful, because now I have like a full life, and I'm fully integrated into a community, and I have a lot of service opportunity. And there's this philosopher, Schopenhauer. It says that, there's this one advice for young people, is that they should just actually realize that the world doesn't have much to offer you. It's one thing to understand that, listen, it's not like you're going to find some kind of something that will make you. It's like that. If you abandon this idea, and if you start looking not for something that's glittering, but looking for something that's valuable, then your perspective changes, and you realize, wow, actually, this is not nice. It's not a nice life. And I think that reality hits people. Like I was listening to a podcast by Kostuba and Raghunath when they were on Namrash's show. And then there's one point he was saying that, when they started doing this thing, they hit a whole different demographic. They hit people like in their late 30s, 40s, who are having kids. And these people, what's different with them is like when you're young, you're like thinking, oh, what your life is going to be like. When you're like 40, you have 2 kids, you're just like, geez, if I can just have a house and I can feed these 2 kids, then it's like, that's success, So your reality, you actually start to realize what the realistic what the realistic thing is that you should look for. So in entering spiritual communities, that principle is also there. And it's also one of the big things that kill confidence is prayas, over endeavor. It's actually endeavoring for things that are too difficult to obtain. And many times people just practically, they set their sights on career paths or lifestyle choices that are just outside of their reach. It's like stay in your lane. Yadrichaya labasantushta. One should just be peaceful with what comes of its natural accord. And each of us, we have a certain natural thing that comes of your accord. There's like a certain natural level that is just sort of given by you by momentum that is built up even from your past life. And if you can just understand, well, this is sort of just where I find my place, and it might not be so glorious and whatever, but this is where I am. And that principle, that's actually a big step to take. And then it will be easier to find your place in a community, because people speak about community, but community life there's always an element of community life that is cumbersome and painful. Because that's just the reality of life. There's just all these elements that has to be done, and then people run away from these things, and then they can never clock in. And those people who clock in, you can see, are the ones, they're not afraid. They just say, okay, this is it. This is actually, let me forget about all my let's pull my head out of the clouds and realize that, well, what do I need? And I can get it here. So let me just pull up my sleeves and let me get to work and help be part of this thing. And then you can find your proper place.
Beautiful. Yeah, you can go.
I just really like that, and that's why it always comes back to words like dedication and responsibility to me when we're talking about communities, because oftentimes there's this romantic idea that community means a bunch of people that are just going to like me and do like everything I want, festival. And it'll be easy. Yeah, a rainbow festival. Even though rainbow festivals are hell, if anyone's ever been to
yeah,
one.
I've been. They are hellish.
It doesn't exist. It's like it's good for a couple days. But so I really appreciate what you were saying, and the fact that it's hard work, and realizing there's going to be hard work somewhere. So you need to put it in proactive places and not over endeavor. Yeah. And I also like this. You quoted Schopenhauer here. Look for something that's stop looking for things that are glittering. Start looking for something of value. And I would go even a further step as a Krishna Bhakta and say, start looking for the things that are there. They're sitting right in front of you. It's like, imagine you're in a well. We'll use the hackneyed well analogy. You're sitting in a well, and somebody throws a rope down to you, and you're like, it's purple. Like, can I get a red rope? Like, well, there's 3 knots in it. Can I get 4? Like, can I get a knot for my feet too? It'll be more comfortable on the way up. Maybe you could put it's 2021. Can you put like a nylon, like skiing handle, like water skiing handle on it? It'll be easier for me. There's a rope. Grab that thing, So it's like we're so involved in like thinking how things should come and how we want them, not even how we need them, that we're completely ignoring the fact that it's literally like dangling and bouncing in my face.
Then it seems one big obstacle, sorry to cut you off there, but just one big obstacle to this idea of learning to just be happy with this is what the empirical self is going to be. I found my spot and be happy with that, which takes, I imagine, a lot of humility, again, coming in this part of the conversation. It seems the biggest obstacle to this, frankly speaking, for our generations and after, is digital media. And I largely contribute the lack of confidence that I see in younger generations. Like, I'm not old, but I'm getting up there. I'm up there enough to call someone a younger generation, a couple of them. And and my experience with a lot of younger, like devotees specifically, but just younger people in general, is that they're trying to find that empirical self in the digital universe, or with the digital universe as the sort of template of what it means to be a successful person empirically and what it means to be confident empirically. And I think this is largely contributing to the lack of confidence. At the same time, this is a world that they're inhabiting, and a lot of our friends are starting to have children, and their children will be engaged in this digital universe. And so they're going to meet with the same sort of issues. So I'm wondering, and this is a thing that comes up a lot on this podcast, is the role of technology and the disintegration of the self-confidence of the individual. And it seems like it plays a pretty huge role, just based on these last comments about community and empirical self. So how are we supposed to deal with this digital universe as we're trying to develop, or as we're trying to give that to the next generations, the sense of self-confidence, the sense of being satisfied with the empirical self that you are? How are you supposed to compete with this digital universe unless you decide to not participate in it and participate practically in a smaller community where your empirical self can really evolve in the context of that small community? Like, is it even possible? Like, I guess I'm a little cynical that if you want to participate in mainstream culture, if any of this is even possible.
I have one thought on this, and a lot of it comes from seeing a couple minimalist videos and a couple like quite famous people that are very productive in the world and are gaining traction in like the attractiveness of the fact that they're able to move through the world, even though it's such a technological world. And I think largely we've been in a big experiment where people have just been unhealthily consuming these things without any real warning and just thought that it's kind of the saving grace and salvation and progress forward. And I think it's just going to take a time where society takes a swing and recognizes to a large degree that these things are powerful and need to be regulated and controlled on an individual level. We can already see small movements among college students, like just recognizing, no, I have a drawer for my phone and I go to my phone when I want to use my phone. It's not that it doesn't stay in my pocket. It's not, I only have the apps that I need, you know, the things are gaining traction. So I'm a cynic. I'm not a cynic, but a pessimist. I don't know that we're ever going to see like a big, bright, you know, kind of renaissance in the thing. But I think that's what's required, is kind of becoming a little sober and realizing we're dealing with something really powerful. And if I want to live a life that isn't gray and basically already dead, I've got to start regulating the way that energy enters into my sphere. I personally just did 3 months without my cell phone because I had the luxury of being here and just being able to shut it off. And it's been really nice, dude. It's been really nice. I know most people can't do that, but we have to find ways to get out of. I think one thing that comes back to the community thing is accountability, and realizing that we need to start talking to each other and like see that this stuff is pervasive, because that also has a certain level of empowerment to it. That when you see that something is pervasive and everyone is struggling, then you can kind of rise up and collectively amass your strength and start a little revolution amongst your group of friends, amongst your community. And you can say, you know what, none of us stand for this. Like, let's stop this. And I think that's, if we look at porn, that's literally the only way people move forward in that thing, because it's impossible to do it alone. And as soon as you see people coming together and saying, whoa, you have this problem too, let's stop this. We all agree this is bad. Let's help each other and let's move out of it. And that's really the only kind of, you know, it's the same thing with Facebook, YouTube, Netflix. It's binging. That's what you're doing. You know, maybe it doesn't look as bad as pornography, but you're binging and you're just juicing your brain for everything it's got. You're just squeezing it. And then it's no wonder you have no drive, because you're getting all the hits you're supposed to get slowly, you know, when you accomplish things in the real world. So again, I think it comes back to kind of real community, not just an infrastructure you're sitting in, but a group of people that you're connected with psychologically, emotionally, through responsibilities. And then, you know, you're talking to them and you're saying, hey, I don't like this about myself. This isn't working. Can you help me? I need an accountability buddy. I just had Dave Amadova. He helped me get 100 hours a week for a couple weeks, you know, for like a month and a half period in Sanskrit studies. I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been able to go to him and be like, this is what I want. Can you help me hold myself to this? You know, I would have just been like, nobody really cares. 6 hours a day is enough. You know, it's still great. But that camaraderie, like, you could pull something out.
All right. Yeah, nice. Harvey, last comments last.
Okay, my final comments.
Oh, just before your final comments, in response to this question, digital universe and the
sure, technology. We all know it's like sugar, pesticide, all this crap. We design it, then we go to a period where we think we can go for it, and there will be no reaction, and then obese population later we're like, oh crap, sugar is not healthy. And then we try to regulate it. So we can see in our society for now, for example, sugar it's like something everybody knows, many people know, and it's being educated, and sort of it's going down, it's getting under control. It's still there. They try to push it, high fructose corn syrup and all kinds of stuff. But for the rest, like we've learned, oh, that's not a good idea. Same with pesticides. We said, hey, God, it's so much easier if we just spray pesticides over thing, and it's going to be way easier to farm. God, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then like 50 years later, people get cancer, and then realize, hey, this is not a good idea, and then we regulate it. And it's still not over, but it's regulated. So the same thing has happened. It's exploded, and now many people are realizing this is not a good idea. It completely kills my awareness, but still it stays there in the background. Just like, none of us really like pesticides. We avoid it, but still it's still creeping up, and that's why most of us will die of cancer in any case, most likely. So any case, that's just the contamination of Caligo. It comes, and then there's a spike, and then we get it under control. And for any person, I think, if you want to do something positive, I think the realistic understanding is that as an immediate goal to be able to gain confidence in Krishna consciousness, you have to invest in learning immediate skills. Like there's a wide variety of skills within our society, learning Sanskrit, learning musical instruments, all these kind of things. This is actually where normal people, this is where you get empirical, this is the aspect of the empirical self and you can draw immediate confidence from. Actually learning a skill, seeing, wow, I just invested 100 hours in learning Sanskrit. Now I understand the dhatus, and then you feel great about yourself. Or you say, you invest 100 hours into playing Mridanga, and then you get to do something. So that experience, that's how people generally do it. For most people, it also comes from an occupation, a trade. That's why I also think many devotees should be getting into trades. A trade is just like a great way. I think Ananda Gauranga Prabhu is studying jewelry making. I hope he starts a trend. I think it's like wonderful. Trade-based occupations actually give a lot more satisfaction because you're learning a skill and then you become good at it, and that's how you make your money. And it's like really something tangible. And that means just by performing your occupation, you actually gain confidence empirically. This is a normal person because you know what you're doing. And I at the temple, I work quite a lot with tradespeople. So people, plumbers, electricians, and these guys, they just know what they're doing. And these guys are peaceful, man. They just come in, they just come in, they like check what's happening. And they know that there's just like a certain kind of confidence and calm that comes from being capable. So that's actually practically our biggest problem with technology. It's not what it does to your brain, whatever. The problem is time. All this time you're wasting, but the only skill that you're learning is how to flick a phone. That's practically what you're learning. So I think if we would again, and Prabhupada also had that vision. You see, Prabhupada was super into skill-based things, like people learning the instruments, learning the language, doing art. He was actually very encouraging when people had certain skills that could be engaged in Krishna's service. And he was, he loved it, acting, whatever. So I think if we do a skill-based focus again in our community and help people prioritize in learning that, and like you're saying, it comes from management. Like there you're sitting at a place and the management is allowing you to develop a skill. So that's nice. If you were in my temple, I'd be forcing you to wash pots. But what's this? Learning Sanskrit, wasting your time. Crazy. We got some hard work to do. So if it can be encouraged from above, that really help people invest in learning skills. Even for me, like learning Mridanga was one of my big shifts in my Krishna consciousness, where I had this after 4 years of just cooking and working like a donkey. Then I picked up an instrument and I learned it, and I was like, wow, God, I just forgot that whole experience of investing in learning a skill, and that really ignited for me a whole different part of my Krishna consciousness that later developed into doing other things. So that I think is very practical that some people can do, and these things, it's simple, like learning how to sew. It's a great thing, like learning how to make clothes for the deities. It's like such a practical skill, and you can save so much money from, instead of buying things created in sweatshops in East Asia, you can make your own damn clothes. And, so these things are very practical. So that's one thing. But as my final comment, what I would like to end off, or just a final point that I would like to bring it to, is we have to also know how the ideal looks. If one is actually positively drawing confidence in a transcendental sense from the reality of the spiritual reality, from Krishna's service, and from our ontological position, how does that actually look? And we might be surprised to see how that looks. And if we read the CC, then we see when Sanatana Goswami, at a certain point when he had contracted a severe disease, a skin disease, due to drinking contaminated water in the Jharkhand forest, and when he made it to Puri, his body was filled with sores and they were oozing pus and blood. And then Lord Chaitanya grabbed him when he saw him and he gave him a hug. And he continued to do this. And Sanatana Goswami felt so vile and wretched due to this body that he had. And he actually decided to throw it away, to commit suicide. And which was very fascinating. And then at a certain point, Lord Chaitanya, when he met him again, Lord Chaitanya slapped him and said, because Lord Chaitanya is God, he knows everything. He says, who do you think you are? And this body does not belong to you. He says, do you think you can obtain Krishna's mercy by killing yourself? He said, you can only obtain Krishna's mercy by performing devotional service. That's actually how you will obtain Krishna's mercy. So it's very fascinating to think that a person like the Sanatana Goswami, even he felt vile and wretched and overwhelmed by a certain inability in his empirical identity. But it is obviously it's just apparent, because the reality was that he was fully fixed in his identity as Lord Chaitanya's servant. And therefore we see that the devotee, the pure devotee, actually, when he looks at himself, and that's what we hear, pure devotees, they don't actually feel very self-confident. When they look at their own ability, they actually oftentimes express it in their bhajans, in their songs. And I think when we enter into devotional service and you have that darshan of yourself, the reality is just from an eternal perspective, our conditioned sense is pathetic. It's like we're extremely tiny, extremely small, not very powerful. Whether we're going to compare it to people in the past or just to the ultimate position that we are in. So that awareness is actually not that's part of the principle, because we see that these pure devotees, they have that experience, they have a full experience, because the ego is shed. So instead of filtering the understanding of their self through this idea of what they are, they actually see themselves for what they are and where they are at. And it's actually shocking, and it's actually very frightening when you see that, when the ego, when you actually, that ego does collapse. So we see that the pure devotees, therefore they have this acute sense of their own inability and of their own real position, of their own empirical position, where they actually are situated in the material world. But then that is combined with the unshakable, unbreakable, full conviction that by obtaining Krishna's mercy, that is the actual thing that will make, that is where my hope is lied in. And the wonderful thing about when you make that your ultimate, if that becomes your identity, that becomes your hope, the wonderful thing about that is nothing can stop that. No empirical inability or disability can hamper you from actually executing service to Krishna. So that's actually how in Bhakti philosophy, that one comes to the point of having unshakable confidence, is because your confidence is situated in the fact that if I can serve Krishna, then that is good, and that nothing can actually stop that. Even apparent failure or whatever it is externally, nothing can actually stop you. If you have the desire to serve Krishna, nothing can hamper that. So, but we see that, even in this enlightened souls, it's not that Sanatana Goswami feels like a boss, or that, when you become a pure devotee, you have that same sense of conflated self-importance. It's actually also absent. So when you feel overwhelmed or you don't feel so good about yourself, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and don't necessarily expect that it will go away, because it might just be a symptom of coming more into the mode of goodness, that you understand what your actual position is.
Fascinating. Ujjwal, final thoughts? I have something on that, but what Hari Vilasa just said, but I want to hear.
Well, one thing I love that last point, because to me it just rings so true to what's said in Madhurya Kadambini. When we hear about the actual progress of Anartha Nivritti, many devotees feel like, oh, Anartha Nivritti means I get over them and they're gone and I just triumph. But really, Anartha Nivritti means coming to the stage of Nishta and realizing, oh, the only thing that's actually going to get me out of this is taking shelter of real Krishna consciousness. I have all these things, and the only thing that can actually clear them is doing bhajan, and we don't take that stereotypically. It means really trying to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness with some fixedness, with some nishta. So yeah, I really appreciate that point, because what it paints is that actually progress means a realization of my shortcomings to a large degree when we're doing bhajana kriya. And if we don't understand that, and again, if we just have kind of a conflated two-dimensional definition of that, then we may look at progress as though it's not progress. We may think, oh, no, things are getting harder and worse, and I'm not thinking so good about myself, and things aren't working. But as you said, Hari Vilas Prabhu, we should introspect and embrace that. And then I would use that to underscore the fact that we have to know that that's what's supposed to go on to begin with. Again, I really reel at the idea that we just take the things that we understood when we first joined Krishna consciousness. And then that's our definition of Krishna consciousness. And like, we're done acquiring an understanding of what it is, because quotes ad nauseum, simple for the simple, it's just do the easy thing, save it will save you. So many of these things, they're true when they're applied properly. But if you don't apply them properly, then what happens is you have a very, very kind of rudimentary understanding of something that is very, very, very nice, but because you don't understand the niceness of it, you don't really want it. And then we don't actually want to strive towards that thing. So we have to understand what we're dealing with. Otherwise, how do we do it, And I think that's the lurch. It's certainly the lurch I felt myself in, and to largely, I still feel myself in that, and I'm working my way through it. But yeah, there's a way to get through that, and a way to move forward towards that type of commitment and faith. Ultimately, what does faith mean? Faith really means understanding what you're dealing with and understanding what reality is.
I'm hearing both of you speak, and Karuna, I want to hear your thoughts last because, because you're the youngest out of all of us, I think, and I want to hear how you're hearing
Really?
this.
Younger than me?
I think so. How old are you, Ujo? 28, 29?
28.
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
No,
1 year
that
younger.
doesn't. Come on.
But Ujo grew up, getting life was handing his ass to him many times, so he's got a certain gravity about him.
Well, Karuna Avatar can tell you some stories also.
I'm remembering from Acharya Bhaktivinoda Thakur and his Bhajana Rahasya, and the second verse where he talks about anartha nivritti. And in there, he talks about 4 categories of anarthas. Anyway, not going into great detail, but one of the categories of anarthas is tattva brahma, illusion about reality. And he divides illusion about reality into 4 parts: illusion about sadhya, illusion about sadhana, illusion about tattva, like Krishna, the reality itself. And there's a 4th part that I don't precisely remember. And so what I'm hearing from both of you basically is that, as working with this earlier definition, is confidence being where you draw your strength from. We should draw our strength from the reality. So the clearer the reality is, and all aspects of this is the tattva, this is the sadhya, this is the sadhana to reach there. And having clarity about that whole landscape, what it means, this is going to allow us to have confidence or draw energy towards that reality, because we have a certain trust in that reality and confidence in its existence, confidence in its potency to imbue us with the power that we don't have to actually achieve, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that sense, you kind of get a sense of the relationship between the sort of physical and the metaphysical. Like, I noticed that with the secular world, they always try to solve issues without looking at the metaphysical aspects of the issue that underpin all sorts of manifestations of problems. And just hearing how you kind of define things, having that clarity on the metaphysics allows for this proper orientation, which will allow you to realize that even when you're feeling like a piece of something that's not positive, but that can be progress toward actual imbibing of the true reality that is our ontological position, as vulnerable, as limited, as imposed by these other energies. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to exist in this sort of defeated state, but rather you can be encouraged that despite my state, there is this reality that has potency that can empower me to continue to move towards that reality and get out of the material, et cetera. And that way you can maintain confidence. That's spiritually speaking. And also, if you're aware of the landscape, the full landscape, just coming to an earlier part of our discussion, then you can understand, like, this is where I'm at, and have the humility to admit that. This is where I'm at. This is how I need to deal with my empirical existence. And here's my next step, moving towards this ultimate reality, knowing that at the end of the day, I'm ultimately weak and can't do it. And there's this greater thing that is drawing me in by its own power through Sangha, through various factors are there. That's kind of, I'm trying to just like piece together all the things that I've heard in a quick gloss. That's good? That sounds all right?
Sounds great.
Karuna, let's hear something from you. And I see some comments here I'd like to share too.
You got to buy down there.
Yeah. Well, maybe just kind of like on what we've been hearing, maybe let's just address a bias comment, and then I'll quickly say that lucid recognition of our deficiencies leads to progressive six-fold surrender, which leads to a real sense of security, confidence, and happiness. Very nice. Very, very nice. Bhakti Lata says,
Sorry.
Yeah, so powerful. We draw true confidence from reality and from truth. Well, Prabhu's, just on this point of technology, it's just kind of like a fascinating experience. I've mentioned this once before, but basically, you guys all have an advantage over me because you're 7 hours behind me, right? So this podcast always happens at 7 in the evening, right? And then usually I've spent an entire day like engaging quite intensively with information and so many conversations going on simultaneously. So you know what happens like with lizards, with toads, sometimes is they have like this kind of like sleeve that like covers over their eyes, you know, and then it's just like zoop. So for basically the last few minutes, I'm like here and I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, and then just like zoop. And it's so, but just getting a little bit more real about it and a little bit more grave about it is that, you know, this is my intense kind of, or I would say my greatest challenge at the moment is the fact that like I constantly have multiple like really serious conversations engaging with people about like important subject matters on a deep level going on simultaneously, constantly, like through this, right? And it's just, it takes up a hell of a lot of mind space. And there just comes a certain point where you simply cannot process anything further. It's finished. It's finished. So that's just kind of like a really difficult thing. It's just how do you deal with the constant onslaught of people's demand on your attention and your input in their lives? It's like it's really problematic. It essentially soaks up all the mind space. And then just also another point on technology, I think, which just makes it really challenging for people in terms of self-confidence, is just how much comparison goes on. And it's just like, you know, you can see thousands of examples of people doing things that you're doing, but just, you know, so much better than you from your subjective kind of standpoint. And that is immensely bewildering, because instead of now not comparing yourself, but instead of existing within a village, within a small community, that you're making a head-on direct impact in a handful of people's lives, there's so much meaning and value in that. But now you're suddenly comparing yourself to the entire world, and that's ridiculous. You know, like, how are you supposed to have any sense of self-security in that? But one realization that I've come to recently, which has been immensely helpful for me, and I think this is going to apply especially to a lot of devotees that are also involved in the wellness realm and trying to get people to improve their lives, is the fact of the matter is that you're going to interact with people only the way that you can. Like, no one can interact with that person or anyone the way that you can. It's like your offering is something completely unique to yourself, and it's just, you know, you have the power to make a unique difference in people's lives. So anyway, that's been helpful for me.
Got it.
The reptilian reality is like closing in on me, so I'm kind of
Nice. All right. Thank y'all very much. I want to give special thanks to Ujjwal and Harvey Lasru. They're big brains in our little small community of men sanghas that we do. Super inspiring persons and wonderful friends of mine. Harvey Lass has got another show that he's doing in the evening time. I think today he's doing a little series called On the Police. You say Polis?
Polis.
Yeah.
On the popo.
Where?
Discussing political issues and other such things from a Vedic perspective, because we're politically preoccupied at the present moment. Of course, the elections are over, so it's coming down to proper levels now. But still, it's in people's psyches. He's giving a very wonderful Vedic perspective on that, and you see his mind is very wonderful. So I want to hear that. That is also happening on Boudica at 7 p.m. tonight. So special thanks to Boudica for hosting so many wonderful offerings from these devotees.
Ooh.
I think we lost him.
Yeah. So thank you to Boudica. It's really wonderful. Okay, you're with
He's back.
Am I back?
Yeah,
You're back. Welcome.
my-
Thank you to Boudica for
God bless
Yeah.
Boudica.
Thank you to Boudica for hosting so many wonderful creatives where we can hear and get inspiration practically throughout the week. So it's a really wonderful community. You want to jump on that. Also, Arise is having a newsletter that we're sending out once a week, filled with personal testimonials of triumph and other useful information pertaining to becoming a man of full integrity.
Full integrity.
full integrity.
integrity. He's like in the exact same spot.
It lost.
You're back.
Yeah.
It's back now, right?
We got it. Full integrity.
I don't know. I don't really know what's going. Oh, I get what's happening. It switched Wi-Fi suddenly. All right. Anyway, sign up for ariseman.net. Get the newsletter. It'll have many offerings on there for programs that we're offering for man. Please come. Thank you. Thank you, fam, for joining us. Please continue to be with us and grow with us. We really do appreciate all the letters that we get and affection. Thank you again, Ujjwal, Harvey Lass. Always a pleasure to have you. Hariom.
Thank you.
Nice, sadhus.
Sorry, time to break fast.